Question 1, two lines intersect as shown. What is the value of x? So whenever two lines intersect, the vertical angles are congruent, meaning this one, as well as this one and this one. Easiest way to do this is probably just to set them equal to each other. So 5x plus 5 equals 7x minus 35. We're going to subtract 5x from both sides. It's going to leave us with 2x. Add 35 to both sides. That gives us 40. Divide by 2. So we have x equals 20. And the answer is B. Question 2. What is the positive solution to the given equation? So they want the positive value of x. Whenever you have an absolute value equation or inequality, you have to break it up into two situations, and I recommend putting your negative on the side that doesn't have the absolute value. This becomes 2x minus 4 is equal to 8, or the other possibility is 2x minus 4 is equal to negative 8, and then when you take the absolute value of it, it becomes positive. So these are your two possibilities. Just do the algebra. Add 4 to both sides. 2x equals 12. Divide by 2. X equals 6. This is likely going to be the answer because it's positive. You can double check by looking at the other side. Add 4 to both sides. We get 2x equals negative 4. Divide by 2. X equals negative 2. And obviously that's the negative solution. So we're going with the positive, and that's C, x equals 6. Question 3. Which of the following is equivalent to 4x cubed plus 8x squared? So when you glance at the answers, what you'll notice is that you've got an x squared, or an x to the fifth, and then it's multiplied by two things added together in a parentheses. That should look like that you factored something out from the original. So keeping that in mind, what could you possibly factor out from the original? The 12 is too big, so we're going to reject those. You could factor out a 4x squared. You could also factor out an x squared. Remember, on the SAT, sometimes they don't want you to do things the way you do it in school. You don't have to factor out the greatest common factor. It could be a smaller one. So let's do it based on what they're doing. First, we'll factor out a 4x squared. So 4x cubed divided by 4x squared is going to leave you with an x to the 1. Plus, if you factor out a 4x squared here, so 8x squared divided by 4x squared is going to be 2. And that automatically gives you answer choice C. The other way you could have done it is, after eliminating choice B and C, just go the opposite direction, multiply this out like that, and then you're going to get the original. Question 4, 2n plus 12 equals 26n. What is the value of 6n? So you always want to keep in mind, what is the goal? In school, you're generally taught to find the value of n, but not on the SAT. So let's rewrite it. 2n plus 12 equals 26n. We could do regular algebra, so subtract 2n from both sides. We get 12 equals 24n. Now here's the key. Your instinct would probably tell you to divide by 12 on both sides, and then you get 1 equals 2n. And that's fine, because when you solve for n, you would multiply by 3, and then you would get your answer. But on the SAT, keeping in mind the goal, if you know the value of 24n, and you want to get 6n, what do? You divide by 4 on both sides, because then you get 6n equals 12 divided by 4 is 3. And that gets you the answer directly. So again, on question 4, this is really not going to matter. It's really a matter of like 2 seconds, but the time does add up. And on a more difficult question, they could give you something where doing a shortcut or solving for what they want as opposed to solving for n can save you a lot more time. So just keep that in mind. Question 5, we have a diagram. Quadrilateral ABCD is shown. Which equation shows how the measures of the angles of the quadrilateral are related? Notice all the answer choices, we're adding a lot of things up. So choice A, you're adding x plus the right angle plus the two other angles equals 360. So obviously in this question, you need to know what the sum of all these angles actually is. And you might think all the answers are 360. It's got to be equal to 360. But look at what they do to try to trick you. Choice A is basically adding up the 4 angles. Choice B is also adding up the 4 angles, but then multiplying by 4. So if you assume that this quadrilateral, the sum of its angles adds up to 90 degrees, then all you have to do is multiply by 4 and get 360. Choice B could be correct. Obviously that's not correct because this in itself is a 90-degree angle, so adding all these angles together is going to be way more than 90. Just because all 4 answer choices have 360 as the total, that does not necessarily mean that the sum of these angles is going to be equal to 360. So how do you know the sum of the angles? The formula that you should have memorized is n minus 2 times 180, where n is the number of sides of the quadrilateral. So in this particular case, the quadrilateral has 4 sides, so it's 4 minus 2 is 2 times 180, and the sum of all the angles is going to be 360. If you had a pentagon, for example, that has 5 sides, you just plug it in, 5 minus 2 times 180, calculate that, and then you get the sum of all the angles of the pentagon. So now that we know it's 360, the answer is obviously A, because this takes into account all 4 of the angles. Notice what choice C and D does. Choice C leaves out the right angle, which is B. Choice D is doing the same thing as choice B, where they leave out the right angle here, but they assume that the sum of the angles is 90. That's why when you multiply it by 4, you get 360. Question 6, in right triangle ABC, the length of side AC is 12, the measure of angle A is 40, B is a right angle. Which of the following can be determined using the information given? So let's do a quick sketch. We know that B is the right angle, so we'll put it here. Doesn't really matter where we put A or C because we can just rotate it. So A is going to be 40 degrees. AC is definitely the hypotenuse no matter where we put it. That's 12. And the question is asking which of the following can be determined. So if they're asking, do we know angle C and do we know the length of AB, what they're really asking is, given this information that this is 90, this is 40, this is 12, is there only one possible triangle that can be drawn, or are there multiple? So another way to think about this is, what is your criteria for having congruent triangles? Congruent theorems basically tell you the minimum information you have to have congruent triangles. And in this case, notice what we have. It's an angle, and a side. Given that we have angle, angle, side, we know that these 3 pieces of information determine one specific triangle, because if I were to draw another triangle with the same angle, angle, side, they would be congruent. So to do this problem, you just want to keep in mind all the ways to prove triangle is congruent: side, 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 angle, side, angle, side, angle, 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 side, and don't forget for right triangles, hypotenuse, leg. So given that we know we have one definite triangle by angle, angle, side, let's look at what they're asking. Do we know the measure of angle C? Yes. Do we know the length of side AB? Yes. If you want to calculate that, you just have to do 180 minus 40 minus 90, and you'll get angle C, C. Now, if you forgot about congruent triangles, the other way to think about this is visually. So we know that this angle is fixed, this angle is fixed, this side is fixed. Can the measure of angle C vary, or is there just one angle that C can be? So let's imagine that angle C were a little bit bigger. What would happen? Obviously, we would be forced to extend AB, and this would no longer be a right angle, so we can't make it bigger. Can we make angle C smaller? The answer is no, for the same reason, because we'd have to shorten AB, and that would no longer be a right angle. C is going to be fixed, given the fact that this is a right angle, this is 40, and this is 12, because we can't move anything else. So let's consider whether the length of side AB can change. It's very similar to before. Let's imagine we want to make AB shorter. We can't do that without changing the length of AC if we want to keep the right angle. If we want to make AB longer, again, our options are we'll be forced to make AC longer to keep the right angle, or we'd have to draw it to C, but that would ruin the right angle. So again, the length of AB has to be the same in order to preserve both the right angle of B as well as the length of side AC. So again, the answer is going to be 1 and 2. Question 7, in the xy plane, line L has a slope of 2. Line K is perpendicular to line L and contains the point 4, 2. Which of the following is an equation of line K? So the quickest way to do this is to notice that all your answer choices are in y equals mx plus b form. And we know that the slope of line K, because it's perpendicular to line L, is the negative reciprocal. So the slope of line K is going to be negative 1/2. So therefore, automatically, we know that because m is the slope, choice A is out, choice B is out. Now between choice C and D, if we know that the line contains this point, let's just plug it in. So C, 2 is y, so 2 equals negative 1/2 of 4. Now obviously 2 does not equal negative 2, so C is going to be out. And just to double check D, 2 equals negative 1/2 4 plus 4. This becomes negative 2 plus 4 equals 2. And yeah, 2 obviously equals 2, so D is going to be the answer. Now the other way to do this is a little bit longer. Let's imagine that you didn't have the answers to look through and eliminate. You still can generate the equation, because remember, to get an equation of a line, you either need 2 points, because 2 points determine a line, or you need a point and a slope, because the point tells you where the line is, the slope tells you how narrow or how steep it is. We know already that the slope is negative 1/2. We also know that the line contains 0.42. We use the point slope formula, which is really a derivation of the slope formula. Slope is rise over run, or change in y over change in x. We multiply both sides by the bottom. We get x2 minus x1 times the slope equals y2 minus y1. This is what you should have memorized as the point slope formula. And now we know the slope, we know a point, so we're just going to plug it in, negative 1/2. Now when you plug in 4,2, it doesn't matter whether you plug it in for x2, y2 or x1, y1, just be consistent. I'm going to do 4 minus x all times negative 1/2 equals 2 minus y. To get rid of this fraction, we're going to multiply by negative 2 on both sides. That leaves us with 4 minus x. 2 times negative 2 is negative 4. Negative y times negative 2 is positive 2y. Add 4 to both sides. We get 8 minus x equals 2y. Divide the whole thing by 2. Y equals 4 minus x over 2. This is the same as the answer, choice D. So if you didn't have the choices, this is kind of the real way of doing it. Given that they've given us answer choices, it makes the problem a lot easier because you can just use process of elimination. Question 8. The given equation relates the variables c, x, and y, where c is greater than 0, x is greater than 0, and y is greater than 0. Which equation correctly expresses y in terms of c and x? So on the SAT, whenever you see this question, express something in terms of something, 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 you want the first something on one side of the equation and all the numbers, all the letters, everything else on the other side of the equation. In this equation, we'll rewrite it. C equals y over x, or x over y. Multiply both sides by y, you get yc equals x. Divide both sides by c to isolate the y, we get x over c, and therefore the answer is choice D. Now the only reason they told you that all these have to be greater than 0, probably so that you're not forced to divide by 0 in any of the equations, because then that would be undefined. Question 9, the function f is a linear function, which means it's a line. The y-intercept of the graph of y equals f of x is 0, negative 12. What is the y-intercept of the graph of y equals f of x plus 2? So this is actually a translation problem. What they're really asking is, knowing that you've got a function y equals f of x, what happens to that function when you add plus 2 to f of x? So given that f of x is essentially the same as the y value, when you add 2, logically that should suggest that the graph is going to go up 2. So visually, if your graph looks like this, your line is down here, and the y-intercept is 0, negative 12, and this is the graph of y equals f of x. When you add 2, you're going to translate the line up, and your new graph is going to be y equals f of x plus 2. So your new intercept is going to be 0, negative 10. So the answer is B. In a general sense, what you want to memorize is that when you add 2 to f of x, your graph is going to go up 2. And that stands to reason that when you subtract 2 from f of x, your graph is going to go down 2. But the tricky part is what happens when you add 2 to the x value. Your graph is actually going to move not to the right, but to the left. And when you subtract 2 from the x value, your graph is actually going to move 2 to the right. So this is what you need to memorize for the SAT. If you memorize this, you'll do fine on any of these questions. Now, if you want the explanation for why this looks like it's reversed, all we have to do is let's make up some kind of line on a graph. And let's say our x-axis is here, our y-axis is there. We're just going to make up some points. We'll call that 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Now let's imagine what is f of 2, which basically means what is the y value of 2? That's about up here. So let's say that that's something like 10. What is f of 3? That's over here. F of 3 equals 9. F of 4 we'll say is 8. But the question is, what happens when we start to mess with the x values by adding 2? So instead of saying f of 2, we're going to say, what is f of x plus 2? Notice what happens. Our input value is still 2, but now by adding 2, it's as if the x value is 4. So we're still here at f of 2, but what is the value of f of 4? It's 8 right over here. Our new point is going to be here. Likewise, what if we do f of 3 plus 2? That's the same as doing f of 5, which is over here, and we'll say that that value is 7. So f of 3 plus 2, which is here, is going to be 7. Likewise, this is going to keep happening. F of 4 plus 2, because we're adding 2 to each value, is going to be 6. That's over here. Notice what's going on. Every time we put an input value of a given x value, by adding 2, it's actually like we're putting the input value of the point that's 2 away. So that has the effect of dragging the line to the left because our input values were 2 to the right. So that explains why when you add 2 to the x value, your graph is going to move left 2. And likewise, when you subtract 2 from the x value, your graph is going to move to the right. But for the SAT, all you have to do is really memorize this and you should be good. Question 10, which of the following is an x-intercept of the graph of that in the xy plane? So an x-intercept right over here is when the graph crosses the x-axis. When you cross the x-axis, your y-coordinate is equal to 0. So really what this question is asking is what values of x is going to make y equal to 0. So let's write that out. And we can take each of these as test points. So the first one, we're going to make x negative 3. So very quickly, that looks like this. Plus negative 3 minus 2 all over negative 3. When x is negative 3, this term becomes 0. So anything times 0 is going to be 0 divided by negative 3. It doesn't really matter. You're also going to get 0, so 1 works. Choice 2 is very similar. We take x, make it 2. That means this term becomes 0 multiplied by 5 divided by 2. Doesn't really matter what the numbers are. This is also going to be 0. Choice 3 is interesting because we're making x 0. So let's look what happens. We get 0 plus 3 times 0 minus 2 all divided by 0. Does that equal 0? The answer is no, because anything divided by 0 is going to be undefined. So this is actually a point that's not going to be on the graph. So the answer is just 1 and 2 only, and that's C. Question 11, we've got an exponential function. It says the graph of y equals 2 to the x minus a is shown, where a is a constant. What is the value of a? So golden rule of algebra is if you need to figure out a variable, you have to have the same number of equations. So in this particular case, we've got 3 unknowns, but only 1 equation. So in order to figure out one of those unknowns, we're going to have to figure out the other 2 unknowns. Luckily, since they give us a picture of the graph, we're going to be able to plug in x and y values. And so the only value we're going to be left with to solve for is a. What's the easiest? In an exponential function, I generally recommend, since x is in the exponent, find the point where x is 0. That's right over here on the y-intercept. This point is 0, negative 3. So let's plug it in. Negative 3 equals 2 to the 0 minus a. And 2 to the 0 is 1 minus a equals negative 3. Add a to both sides, add 3 to both sides, and we get a equals 4. So that's going to be our answer. If you're not convinced, let's use another point that's easy, where x equals 1. What's this point? That's going to be 1, negative 2. See if it works. Use the equation. The y value is negative 2. Plug it in. 2 to the 1, which is the x value, minus a. So this becomes 2 minus a equals negative 2. Add a to both sides, add negative 2 to both sides. A becomes 4. We get the same answer, so we know our a value is correct. Question 12, for a certain group of fish, the graph models the relationship between body length L in centimeters and tail area A in square centimeters, where L is in between 6 and 34. Which equation represents the relationship between body length and tail area? So they're basically asking which equation best represents that curve. Notice what's going on if you glance at the answer choices. We're taking the length, we're squaring it, multiplying it by something, and that gets us the area. So probably easiest way to do this is just take a test point that's obvious and see which equation that it fits into. Given that this point falls exactly on some of the axes, I think that's easiest. That's going to be point 15, 5. So let's plug it into choice A. The y value is 5 equals 0.02 times 15 squared, which is 225. Now is 5 200ths of 225? It's about there. What you'll notice is that 0.02 times 225 is going to be a lot closer than 1.23 times 225, because if you multiply those two, you're certainly not going to get 5. Likewise, you're not going to get 5 if you multiply 225 by 2.02 or 3.23. So by elimination of these factors, that means A is going to be the answer. So you didn't even really have to calculate 0.02 times 225. This is also the non-calculator section. So just by glancing at the other answer choices, because they're so far off from choice A, that means A is going to be the answer. Question 13, we got a system of equations. If xy is the solution to the given system of equations, what is the value of x? So remember on the SAT, 90% of the time, you're going to solve systems of equations by elimination. But you also want to be smart about it, because if they're asking the value of x, I would recommend we eliminate the y values so we don't have to go back and plug other stuff in. 4 and 6, what's the least common multiple? 12. So we're going to multiply the top equation by 3. And we're going to multiply the bottom equation by 2. It's already nice because one's positive and one's negative, so we can just add the equations together. This is going to give us 24x minus 12y equals 21. Second equation becomes 6x plus 12y equals 24. Add them both together, we get 30x, the 12y's drop out, equals 45. Divide both sides by 30, that becomes 45 over 30, which is the same as 3 over 2, or 1.5, and so the answer is going to be A. Question 14, in the given system of equations, k is a constant. The system has exactly one solution. Which of the following could be the value of k? So again, which of the following means we're going to plug in the values of k. We'll start by plugging in 2. Notice that both equations are equal to y, so if we're going to solve it, we're going to have to set the equations equal to each other. So 2x plus 5 equals kx plus 3. Now if we're considering that k could be 2, that becomes 2x plus 5 equals 2x plus 3. Do you subtract 2x from both sides? Does 5 equal 3? No. So what that proves is that when k is equal to 2, there are no solutions, because no matter what value of x you could plug in, it doesn't matter because 5 is never equal to 3, and so the equation is not true. So 1 is going to be out, which means A is out, C is out. Now let's plug in 5 for k. So we got 2x plus 5 equals 5x plus 3. Subtract 2x from both sides, we get 3x. Subtract 3 from both sides, we get 2. Divide both sides by 3, we get x equals 2/3. Yes, when k is equal to 5, we have one possible value for x. So 2 works, and the answer is going to be B. By the way, this is a common thing on the SAT, that when you're looking for an equation with no solutions, you want to manipulate the equation so that the x terms drop out and you're left with a contradiction. Likewise, if you're left with something like 5 equals 5, that's a tautology, because that's always true no matter what x is. That tells you your equation has infinite solutions. So this is going to be no solutions. This is going to be infinite solutions. When you have something like this, this is going to be one solution. So just keep those in mind and you'll be fine on these types of questions. Question 15, the function b models the number of flower beetles in a certain area, where t represents the number of days after June 1st. Which of the following is the best interpretation of the number 1.11 in this context? So just by looking at this, I know that the number 1.11 means that the number of beetles is going to grow by 11% each day, or said more simply, it means that each day you're multiplying the original population by 1.1, so that's kind of like the growth factor. In exponential equations, you want to keep in mind you're always starting out with the original value, which is 100. Then you're multiplying it by some factor by which it grows by. So here I'm saying that the population of 100 is going to double. And if I put t in the exponent, that tells me that it's going to double every day. Because when t is 1, it's 100 times 2, which is 200. On day 2, the exponent's going to become 2, so 2 squared, which is 400, and that's 4. And so that shows you that the population is doubling. On day 3, it's going to double again. 2 to the third is 8 times 100 is 800. So notice that each time the day changes, 1, 2, 3, we double the population, 200, 400, 800. So in this case, we're not doubling the population, we're multiplying it by a little more than 1. So we'll just keep that in mind. Choice A, the model predicts that there were approximately 1.1 flower beetles in this area on June 1st. So this is mixing up the 1.11 with the 100. The reason you know that is because the exponent is over the 1.11. So we can test this out. On June 1st, that's the first day, t is equal to 0. So let's look what happens. We got 100 times 1.11 to the 0, which equals 100. So this proves that on June 1st, the original population is 100, and it wasn't 1.11. It would have worked if it said b of t equals 1.11 times 100, and that was raised to the t. Then choice A would be true, but it's not. Choice B, the model predicts that the number of flower beetles in this area increases by approximately 1.11. So you want to be very careful here. It doesn't increase by 1.11 each day. If you wanted to represent that, you would say the original is 100, and that would be adding 1.11, and to say that happens each day, you would multiply that by t. Because on the first day, you'd add 1.11, on the second day, you'd add 2 times 1.11, and it'd be increasing by that each day. So choice B is out. Choice C, the model predicts that it'll take approximately 1.1 days for the number of flower beetles to double. So keep in mind the confusion here is that t represents the number of days. Does 1.11 have to do with doubling? Well, let's look at the math. For the population to double, it would be 200. We started out with 100. Does multiplying the original population by 1.11 and raising it to the 1.11, which is the number of days, is that going to yield 200? Probably not, because this is like 1 raised to the first power. We're going to get a number that's very close to 100. So C doesn't make sense at all. If you wanted C to make sense, you'd have to set it up such that 200 equals 100 times something unknown, and then that's raised to the 1.11. If you can solve for k, then you can say that the model predicts that it'll take 1.1 days for the population to double. But this is kind of hard math, and so it's also a really weird way to express things. Choice D, the model predicts that the number of flower beetles grows by a factor of approximately 1.11 each day. So yeah, that's exactly what we said, because what we're doing is we're starting out with 100, we're multiplying that population by 1.1, and that's actually the growth factor per day. Because back to the original example, if we had said that the beetles grow by a factor of 2 every day, we saw how that works. The only difference here is that the factor is not 2, it's 1.11, which just means that the growth is going to be a little bit smaller or slower. So D is the answer. Question 16, in the xy plane, the graph of that where b is a constant intersects the x-axis at 6, 0. What is the value of b? In this equation, we've got 3 unknowns, including the b, but they do give us a point. Just plug it in and we'll be able to solve for b. So the equation becomes 0 equals 1/2. X is -6 plus b. Just solve. 1/2 of -6 is -3 plus b. Add 3 to both sides. We get 3 equals b, and that's the answer. Question 17, it says, for part of a trip, a car traveled directly away from its starting point at a constant speed. The graph shows the car's distance from its starting point in miles from times 2 hours to 2.5 hours after the start of the trip. What was the speed of the car in miles per hour during this part of the trip? If you've got distance versus time on a graph, I know that the speed is going to be the slope of the line. Why? Because distance over time equals rate. And on a graph, since the car is going at constant speed, it's going to be a straight line. All you need to do is calculate the slope. Just take any 2 points. Let's do the ones that they gave us, here to here, and do rise over run. So the vertical distance is 135 minus 110, which is 25. That's the distance that they traveled. The time is 2.0 to 2.5, so that's 0.5. So 25 divided by 0.5 is going to be 50, and that's our answer for 17. Question 18, in the xy plane, the graph of the given equation is a circle. What is the radius of this circle? So you need to have memorized that the equation of a circle is x minus h squared plus y minus k squared equals the radius squared. This is really the Pythagorean theorem. H comma k is the center, and obviously r is the radius. So how do you get this equation to look like that equation? Given that there's an x squared and an x term, you basically have to complete the square. X squared minus 8x. The quick and dirty way to complete the square is take your b term, divide by 2, and square it. So 8 divided by 2 is 4. Square that, becomes positive 16. Do the same thing for the y. 10 divided by 2 is negative 5. Square it is positive 25. And notice what we did. We added 16 and 25 to the left side of the equation. So we have to do that to the right side of the equation. 16 plus 25 is 41. I'm not even going to solve the left side because all they want is the radius. So 40 plus 41 is going to be 81. And we know that that's the radius squared when it's in the right form. So the answer for the radius is going to be 9. By the way, if you're curious, to get it into standard form, we basically just have to factor. This is going to be x minus 4 squared plus y minus 5 squared. So that tells us that the center of the circle is 4, 5, and the radius, as we said, is 9. But all they wanted to know is the radius, so we stopped at that point. Question 19, what is the sum of the solutions to the equation above? You should recognize very quickly that this is not factorable because 7 is a prime number, so the only factors are 1 and 7. Given that this is positive, there's no way to make -6 when you add them together. So you're going to have to use a quadratic formula. You guys know that. It's negative b plus minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. And you have to remember what this actually represents. Given that there's a plus minus, this expression represents 2 numbers or 2 values. One where you add this junk over here and one where you subtract it. So let's do that and we'll see what we're talking about. Negative b is going to be positive 6 plus minus b squared is 36 minus 4 times a is 1 times c is 7. All that we square root, and all this becomes over 2a, which is 2. That becomes 6 plus minus 36 minus 28 is radical 8 all over 2. Radical 8 is going to be 4 times 2. We'll just rewrite that real quick. So it's square root of 4 times the square root of 2. This becomes 6 plus minus 2 rad 2 all over 2. And now we can divide out the fraction. 6 divided by 2 is 3 plus minus 2 rad 2 divided by 2 is rad 2. And so these are our 2 solutions. When we add them together, we're going to get 6. Because what's really going on is we're saying 3 plus rad 2 plus 3 minus rad 2. Remember, this is first solution, that's second solution. The rad 2's cancel out, and the sum of the roots, or sum of the solutions, is 6. Question 20, we got this crazy looking thing where x is greater or equal to 0. In the given expression, a is a constant. The expression is equivalent to x to the 6. What is the value of a? So to make this easier, we want to change all of this to exponents, because then we can use our rules of exponents. So this becomes x to the third. This radical sign, you guys should know, means to the 1/2. And all of that is then raised to the a. And that's going to be equal to x to the 6. So we know the rules of exponents. When you have an exponent raised to another one, raised to another one, you just multiply all them out. So this is all going to simplify out to x to the 3a over 2 equals x to the 6. So we have the same base. So that means 3a over 2 equals 6. Multiply both sides by 2. 3a equals 12. Divide by 3. a equals 4. And that's going to be the answer. So really just remember that this radical sign is a symbol. It does mean square root. Square root in exponential form means you're raising it to the 1/2 power.